And welcome back, wrestling fans of both persuasions. And I'm going to say that with the premise that today, trigger warning. Yes, we're going to be talking about that world of sports entertainment, pro wrestling. Yes, it's the term that the boomers of the sport of amateur wrestling, which is a term I don't even like, don't like the term pro wrestling. But today, high school coach, novelist, author, uh, teacher, pro wrestling podcast host, JD Oliva back on the program. He's got a new project that he's just released via Kickstarter. And because JD and I spend a lot of time offline, well, not a lot, but there's anytime I have a pro wrestling question, I'm usually texting JD. It's either him or Jerry Briscoe, so that's a name drop there. But today we're going to talk about his next project. But before we get into the project, which features his Kickstarter, the new novel, JD, you've got a bunch of books out. Last time you were on the show, you had this series that you came out and talk about what it went, what was like seeing that project start to finish, and basically how that prepped you for this new book, Gaijin, that we're about to talk about today.
This is Gaijin is my 14th book that I've put out. It's got 12 novels and 2 short stories, novellas, which we'll call them. This book is different than anything I've written before. A lot of the stuff I typically write is like supernatural thriller and stuff that's a little weird. This is just a straight crime story, straight crime noir. Excuse me, that takes place in a world of pro wrestling. So it's a little bit different, but the amount of work that I've put in, I'm more prepared, I guess you could say, to write a novel like this. This one is taking me the longest to write, but it's also my best book. So I'm really proud to get this thing out there. It's different than anything else I've ever written. It's the best thing I've ever done. So I'm really happy about that.
Where's that line come? It was like, it's the best thing I've ever done. I just love it. I don't know. I think I say that about my preview guide every year. I'm like, so I understand the
Excuse me.
value in getting something done that you put your blood, sweat, and tears into. And when it comes to the world of pro wrestling, which as I was a mark as a kid, again, pro wrestling trigger warning terminology alert, marked up as a kid. I sit there and I go back and look at this stuff. I got some surprises for the viewers here today. If you're watching either live or back on our YouTube channel. But before we get to the world of that pro wrestling, how's your coaching season go up this year? You guys you're always a fixture in Fargo with the gigantic team that is Team Illinois. So take us to the end of your season, and then of course the busy Illinois USA Wrestling off season with one of the best, if not the most equipped state organization when it comes to USA Wrestling at the junior and 16U level.
Yeah, so I coach at DeKalb High School in DeKalb, Illinois. I'm a teacher there too. I teach graphic design and video production out there. At the end of our year, I think was a little disappointing, to be honest with you. We had 6 state qualifiers, and I thought we'd have 3 or 4 state placers. We wound up with 1 kid in the blood round and 1 kid placed. So for us, it was a little down from where we wanted to be. A couple years ago, we were nationally ranked, finished second in Illinois for the second straight year, so that was pretty good. But when you're in a public school, especially in the state of Illinois, things kind of ebb and flow. You're up, you're down, you're building. We have at DeKalb, we have a model of consistency that I'm super proud of, where even in years where we're not like great, we're pretty good. So I mean, like we're always going to have a competitive dual meet team. We're always going to have guys looking to place. We're always going to have kids at Fargo competing to be All-Americans. So that's good. I'm very proud to be a member of the Illinois USA Wrestling coaching staff. I've been doing that for about 15 years now. I was a dual team coach for the 16U cadet, the 16U formerly cadet Greco team. I stepped back on that this year as I'm going to grad school, getting my grad school degree, so I get paid more to teach. So I'm not doing that, but this year, so I'm just focusing on making sure our Greco team is prepared. We won 16U Greco last year at Fargo. We had a streak going for about, I think it was 10 years where we had, I think about 10 or 11 years where we consistently won Fargo in that style. So we're trying to keep that train rolling again. We're like clockwork, man. Like we do a really good job getting our kids to do it. Do a really good job getting our best kids to be competitive usually. And we just completed the dual season. It's that's how it goes. Some years you've got the talent, some years you don't. But we have a model of consistency. And right now, Illinois took a big hit with COVID a few years ago, so we're actually kind of on the come up again. It really kind of killed our participation a lot. Our numbers were down for a few years. Things are up now. Things are looking good. We hosted Freestyle State at DeKalb, and the numbers were through the roof. It was like, I think it was our biggest turnout we've ever had. So that was awesome to be a part of that. And it's good to work with guys like Don Reynolds and Brian Medlin, on the Greco side that really helped me enjoy and have helped mentored me as a coach and just gotten me better, man. I love spending my summers out at the Fargo Dome and just watching kids do the little extra things.
Are you counting? Do you keep your credentials? Because I keep my little badges over the years. I think I got most of them. I've got my first one. I missed a bunch. I don't know, in that early aughts. I hate saying the word aught, by the way, but yeah, now they've got like the media pass, so it doesn't. I don't have the badge like the state teams do. Memories. I just remember my first badge, 1999. So I'm coming up on my 25th. Yikes!
I
What's your streak at?
so as an athlete, I was there in 97 and 98, and then I didn't coach again until 2011. So then I started coaching. So I'm there from 2011, now 2024. So it's like 13 years, I want to say.
Yeah,
And
it's
we're
definitely a
lucky if I,
decade.
yeah. So like we're lucky if I don't lose my credential before the tournament is over. So like, I don't know where my credentials are. I mean, like I don't think any of them ever made the trip back to Illinois, quite frankly.
I found mine in like the side panel, like of the car. Since I moved back to Minnesota, it's 6 turns. I joke that it's 6 turns from my house to the Fargo Dome, the Bison Turf, or Herd and Horns. B Dubs, of course, right in there as well, because those are like basically the 5 places you'll find me is the dorm, and then those 3 haunts in one arena. So I haven't gravitated more to like I guess in my 20s when I was down there. Now I'm approaching 45. It's just like Fargo. And it's like I was explaining to somebody who's never been. It's like it's a family reunion.
Oh
And now
yeah.
with the numbers that we've got, I mean, we've set all-time attendance numbers. We're up to 30 mats now. So again, we're going to talk about if you tuned in for pro wrestling, stick around. If you didn't tune in for pro wrestling, you're loving this. But the Fargo Dome is the epicenter of wrestling for 8 days in July. I've got family that goes. My niece is a sophomore, just finished her sophomore year there now. So it's like I married into Fargo. So when I see you out there and Team Illinois, they always hook me up with the gear, man. Like I gotta say, Gene Lee is I blame him for so many things, and I'll get to that in a second. But also, big thanks that Illinois has been good to me over the years, and of course you see Jeremy Spates out there, you see Daryl Thomas, you see yourself, Pete Kowalczyk, who is also he's not one that's shy to shake the boat when it comes to the
No,
junior duels teams and stuff, and
no.
he will reattack that comment left and right when he gets the chance. So when Illinois and Iowa, the Illinois Minnesota thing, when they were battling each other with the shirts like the game of throws. Minnesota was going back at Hodor. No, I love that camaraderie that we get in the summertime. And what's that camaraderie like for you guys in the coaching staff? You talked about the systems in place. There's a lot of, there's a lot of egos and attitudes that are on the same coaching staff. And, year after year after year, Illinois is right there at the top 1, 2, 3 in the country, regardless of style. And now, especially since the girls have even picked it up even more,
Mhm.
this is state supremacy, and it's you guys are all like jawing at each other during the season. When it comes to Fargo, you guys are in sync.
Yeah, it works pretty good actually. Like, there's a lot of egos in the state of Illinois. We, where I'm at, we typically aren't involved with the club thing. Most of our kids kind of train in house, train at home. We'll have some guys that do some stuff, but I mean, mainly our kids are our kids, which is cool. Most of the state is dominated by the club scene. There's about 3 or 4 big clubs that kind of run things, and then when it comes time to Fargo, people are usually pretty good about putting their egos away and doing what's best for Illinois, because realistically we all want, we want those team trophies, we want that team success. I mean, there's a lot of pride in kids in our state just walking around with the Team Illinois singlet, right? I mean, like it is a bit of a status symbol thing for some people. Just making the team is pretty cool. So like when you're out there, I mean, like there's guys that I'll jaw jack with all year, but they're my friends. Paul Collins, coach, Park is one of my dearest friends. Like, and we wrestle each other's teams probably 2-3 times a year. But I mean, like it's friendly, competitive. Like I got friends, the Glenbard North coaching staff, and us will go to war. But during the summertime, I'm hanging out with Joey Gazinski and those guys. Like, I mean, it's just like you said, it's a reunion. It's that friendly competitiveness, like where it gets a little intense, but when, it's like, don't knock you, I'll knock you all I want, but the second somebody else knocks you, we're going to have problems. Right. So when it
It's
comes
like
to Illinois, like,
you can make fun of your brother, but you
yeah, but you,
can't. I can,
right.
you can't.
Exactly. Exactly. Like there's guys that, like, we'll talk to, like, Pete, you talk about Pete Kowalczyk. He's one of my dearest friends. Like, we coached together on that U16 staff for years, and I sat next to him 1,000 times, and, he is not shy in the slightest. So he is. he entertains me greatly, and I love hanging out with him and talking to him. And same with all the guys on the staff. Like those are my friends. Like I didn't go to my high school reunion, but I don't miss Fargo. Like I don't. It's like my vacation time every year where I get to just see my friends. Like I'm a boring person. I don't go out. I don't drink. Like I don't do anything cool. Like I got a million hobbies. I write books. Like I'm a super nerd, but I don't miss Fargo time. Like, I mean, that's when I get to just hang out with my buddies and just, shoot the crap and coach wrestling. Like there's nothing that I would rather do in the middle of July than be out there. My son's 8 and he wants to go to Fargo just to kind of hang out. And I'm not ready for that yet because he doesn't realize what that really entails. So like when he's like
And
12,
dad
I
gets
might
to
bring him out there.
be not boring dad for 8 days.
Yeah.
So, you know,
Yeah. So my wife's not ready for him
yeah.
to do that yet. I'm not ready for him to do that yet. But I mean, when he gets older, I want him to do it so he can see what it is because he's wrestling now and he's having fun with that, and it's probably going to be in his future at some point. So it's cool, man. It's what you do in the summertime.
Yeah, I mean, and they get old enough to be competent to be a towel tapper and volunteer and stuff like that. That's also where you can also defray the cost of their trip and whatnot too. But
Oh,
also, and
that's in the future. He don't know that
yeah,
yet, but that's in his future.
I'm gonna throw this one more back to Gene Lee because again, it is a
Mhm.
big part of the Fargo Almanac that I put together each year in my research. Again, which you can buy fargoalmanac.com. That's a plug for my thing. It just updated it, and actually, I've got to make another change after we get done with this show because I missed a stat, and of course, I can't let something ride for a year. I got to update it then and there, and it's now it's up. JD, I added 37 pages of content to this thing this
Oh
year.
my God.
Yeah, I found every published result of the finals. So 71, 72, 73, 74 still in the pools. They didn't have a true finals. 75 on and juniors got the finals matches. All the cadets except for 85 and 86. And 85 was a little weird because that was like a trials for the Pan Am thing. It counts, but it wasn't part of the system yet. So no outstanding wrestler for that year. No finals. They don't have a published finals at 86, but from then on, got every finals match ever. So that added 20 some pages right there. And then every year Gene comes up, well, hey, wouldn't it be cool if ... And usually that means I'm going to spend the next week working on some brainstorm, some great idea that Gene had. I'm like, I think I can figure that out. And then like you write books. I sit there and geek out on pivot tables and spreadsheets and between Joe Caprino and Indiana, X lookups and V lookups. Like I re-engineered the team scores before they even existed from placement matches. So everything unofficial going prior to 06 is that's all Gene Lee's fault. That's all Team Illinois' fault. So when you read the almanac and you get the update each year, blame Illinois. That's all I got.
Most
Yeah,
people
that's
do.
what I got there. Yeah, blame
That's what
Illinois.
most people
So,
do. It's fine. We'll take that.
and it's not
Gene
just
is an
Izzy. You
awesome.
can't just blame Izzy.
That people would like doing that too. Izzy's a good dude. I understand what you mean. Gene's a great guy. He was one of my best clients for years. I did a lot of video work with the IKWF. He's a good guy, good coach. Like, man, this dude is like so dedicated to Rockford, Illinois, and like, doing what's best for his hometown and doing what's best for his kids. He's a tremendous human being. I can't say enough good things about Gene.
He's a real peach.
Yeah.
Oh,
Makes
movie
you get more
reference
work.
out there. You're a movie guy.
Oh my
there, too, of
God.
course.
Oh my God. It took me a second to Rockford Peaches. Holy jeez.
I mean, he is in a league of his own. I mean, we can do this. We can do the weatherman thing like the guy with the lyrics all day
Bravo.
long. I used to do that with the short time shots. But
Bravo.
moving forward, you talked about hobbies. Like sometimes I'll chime in and I'll see what you're doing on social media. You've got a pro wrestling podcast that you've done. How many years is it now that you've done this thing?
The pro wrestling podcast will be 3 years now.
And was that born out of COVID based on like, all right, well, we're bored. We're still talking wrestling. What do we do?
Pretty much. So like during the pandemic, I started writing about wrestling. The year before the pandemic, I started writing about wrestling for Fansided. I just on a whim, someone said, "Hey man, you should check this out. You like pro wrestling, you're a writer." And I thought it might be fun. I've never done any like news type stuff. So I'm like, what's something I can check off my bucket list? And I met some people there and I got hooked up with Fight Game Media, Garrett Gonzalez, who works for the Wrestling Observer newsletter. We became friends, and he was starting his own podcast network. And I got hooked up with a dude named Mike Gilbert, who's he's a Air Force lieutenant who's a big TNA wrestling fan. So the two of us got to be friends, and we had a podcast that was specifically geared toward like really super niche, like geared toward TNA. And then eventually we just grew our own following out of it. It's now called the Mike and JD Show. We're on the Voices of Wrestling podcast network. We're one of their top shows now. So that's That's that. Yeah, we podcast there. I also do a podcast with comic book culture stuff. I've been doing that for about 6 years now. So I remember I used to talk to you about getting into podcasting all the time. So I mean, the fact that I've been doing it for a few years is pretty cool now.
Yeah, and here we are, just using all sorts of tech and whatnot. Even before we even started,
Hmm.
we were talking about tech that you were using. Also, speaking of TNA, there is a TNA tie-in here. There is a food truck up here in Minnesota with some super good barbecue run by ODB. I'm not really going to
ODB.
say what that one dirty B is what it is. A
Hmm.
Minnesota native bartender. I actually discovered that food truck. I was at a place called Big Louie's, which used to be called Jake's, and I was talking to the bartender, and I said I worked in wrestling. And like, oh, do you know Jessie? And I'm like, wait, what? Yeah, she was a pro wrestler. And I'm like, who are you talking about? And then I don't know. The machines are listening, like literally, like the next day, like people you may know shows up, and it's like her Twitter account. And I'm like, are you kidding me? And then I looked up who it was. Okay, then obviously you go down the YouTube rabbit hole of old pro
Hmm.
wrestling clips. You're like, oh, I know who that is. So last year, one of her and her husband had this truck that drove by like at an office park right here in Fridley, right across the line. And I'm like, all right. And it's like, oh yeah. It's like, how'd you find us? It's like Twitter. She goes, oh, Twitter does work because she's big on Facebook. But had to name drop Jerry Briscoe. So
Of
it's one of
course.
those things. Like, again, that's his second reference on the show so far. So Jerry, I hope you're watching and listening. I wore your shirt on vacation the other day. So there is that. Again, Minnesota, one of those states where we tie in the pro wrestling thing. Now, one thing I also liked about your work when you were doing the fan side stuff is you would weave in the amateur, because again, I don't like that term, the amateur wrestling backgrounds of
Hmm.
these guys, because we know their real names, we know their non-superstar personas. And interestingly enough, I had to go through Joe Russell to get a hold of Shelton Benjamin the other day for the Fargo Almanac, because I had a result that looked wrong. I'm like, I'm missing a guy here. Had to relay a message to Joe to talk to Shelton Benjamin. Shelton Benjamin's fifth place match in 1994, he won by disqualification because the guy threw a punch. Well, I was missing that placer, and it affected the guy who was the champ at 285 or 275. Well, it was up a spot, and it should have been down. There should have been blank. Shelton Benjamin solves the riddle 30 years later. So we are
That's wild.
infinitely tied together, folks. The pro wrestling world and our wrestling world, especially here in Minnesota, definitely weave together. I like how you weave that into your writing. And what is that split? I guess that dichotomy of wrestling coach on the, again, I could use the real side versus the fan sided type of thing, to borrow
For
a
me,
phrase of a website.
the two have always been together. Wrestling is a kind of sport where if your dad didn't do it, there's a harder chance for you to get into it. And my dad was not a wrestler. I was a pro wrestling fan, and I liked pro wrestling for a long time. And I remember my dad called me into my dad, who had just passed away this past February, actually, called me into the living room one Sunday afternoon. He's like, "Hey, look, the Steiner brothers," and it was Rick and Scott Steiner on CBS doing an interview. I didn't recognize what was going on, so I watched it, and it turned out that they were doing an interview for the 1993 NCAA finals. And I knew their gimmick was that they were college wrestlers, but I didn't really know what that meant. So I sat down and watched the rest of the show with my dad. And at that point, I saw what college wrestling was at the NCAA level. And from that moment on, I looked at my dad. I said, "This is what I'm going to do. I'm going to do this." And I was all in on wrestling. So I started late compared to most people. I didn't start wrestling till I was in eighth grade, but I've never walked away from amateur wrestling. I've been a lot of times I've walked away from pro wrestling, because even if you like pro wrestling, you know that it's completely stupid. And like, that's part of the conceit of pro wrestling, is it's the dumbest thing in the world, but you watch it because
You
it's
have to
dumb
suspend
entertaining.
your world, your
Absolutely.
reality. Like, you have to suspend it. I remember talking to my buddy Nate, he was best man at my wedding. I'm back when I'm working for Intermat, and I've told this story numerous times, but I'll be sitting there updating the old results, like manually typing them into our database to, like, it's co-college versus Cornell College or something, because that's my job, is data entry on this thing. And I'm watching Raw, and he's like, dude, how are you like running the best website? And how are you watching this? I'm like, dude, we used to play the Raw drinking game in college. So again, another story that I actually told Jim Ross the rules of the Monday Night Raw drinking game back in the day. Every catchphrase, there's a certain level of drinking to it. You hear Hellfire and Brimstone, you're finishing your beer. It's just, it was you kill a case the first hour of the show. So
Oh yeah, you're lucky you're not
I-
dead if that was stuff like that.
well, when the shows went to 3 hours, that's when we were like, no more, no more.
Smart decision.
Oh
That's the
yeah.
thing, though. For me, the two aren't the same. So I've never thought of pro wrestling and amateur wrestling like together. They're just two things that I like. Like, and I know a lot of people like I almost think like pro amateur wrestling people. Like, I don't like that phrase either, but they just no one's come up with a better one. Like, there's like this inferiority complex in some ways that they get all the attention that we don't get, and it's just like it never bothered me because like they're just so different, right? And I always like when I see like, dude, Joey Areola, right? He's having success in NXT right now
Was
as
he Tony
you know,
D'Angelo? Is that
Tony
that
D'Angelo.
his
Mhm.
some of
No,
getting the
that's the kid
names
that
right, you know.
it's hard. I don't watch NXT, so I forget some of the dumb names they give people sometimes. But I like seeing, or like Bobby Stevenson, right? He's Damon Kemp. Like
Damon
I
Kemp.
like seeing, yeah, I like seeing the guys that were successful in our world that can transition to that next world and have a new career for themselves. Like I think that's awesome that there's something for amateur wrestlers that who might not find a way into UFC or might not find a way into coaching to just continue a version of what we do because like it's grappling, man. It's a staged version of what we do. But I mean, like at the same time, like I read Stephen King books, like I read comics, like I like stupid stuff. So I mean, like to me, there's no conflict between them. Like it's entertaining, it's theater, and I like to see people that come from my world that can become successful at just about anything else.
You mentioned Bobby, so of course Gable is going to be a topic of discussion, and I just we've discussed this offline multiple times about I guess the WWE universe and the fan base when they don't when they don't understand our world, and
Hmm.
you know, and then there it's just it's frustrating. It's like to look at Gable, what you expect, and then of course they hated him immediately. They hated him when he was drafted, like in college. So part of it's like the universe probably would never going to give him a chance anyway. But you're in this world more than I am. What's your perspective on the Gable Steveson experiment with the world of sports entertainment, pro wrestling?
I never thought it was a good fit, to be honest with you. I never thought that. I never. There's some guys like if AJ Ferrari ever decides to make that transition, I think that
Dear
could work,
God.
right? Like I think it just personality wise, I think he would just make that fit. I never thought Gable was a good fit. Like you follow him on Twitter, it seems like he has a lot of interests and like to succeed, especially in that WWE system where you kind of have to be all in and be willing to make that the priority of your life over everything. I never thought it was going to work with Gable. Like I remember we talked about it on some of the fight game shows that I did back when he signed, and I was always kind of like, I don't know, man, I don't know, I'm not feeling this. Like I never thought he had the right personality and the right, like he's not built. He's the greatest heavyweight of this era, maybe ever, but he doesn't look like Brock Lesnar, right? His personality, I didn't think ever had that jump off the page aspect to it. It just didn't. It never felt like it would click to me. If you told me he would fight in UFC and MMA, I'd be like, yeah, that makes perfect sense. This, I never felt like it was a marriage that was going to work, right? And what bothered me the most is when they decided to release him was a few weeks after the Olympic trials. So I was like, really, you guys made this decision now? You knew you were going to do this like for months, and you waited to make sure he couldn't represent the U.S. in the Olympics. Like, I'm not a WWE fan. I don't care for the company. Like, I kind of know how the sausage is made too much,
Mhm.
right? I've been on the inside for just long enough where I've got a lot of biases um, toward their business and their business practices that I
So
just
you think
don't
that
like
move
the
was on
company culture.
purpose? You think
I
that
do.
release time was on purpose?
I do. I absolutely do.
Because they can
I
just
think that
drop
was
you at
their
any time. They don't have to
they can
wait till
drop
like,
you at
oh,
they can drop you at any time. And
hmm,
from what I had heard, and this is just through the grapevine, I cannot confirm this, but
tell
it
a friend,
seemed
tell a
like he
wrestler, right?
tell a friend, tell yeah, one of those. It seemed like it just wasn't working out for him. Like there, like he wasn't really what they wanted, and they weren't really what he was wanting. So I'm like, if you knew this was going to be a thing, why not let him go early so that he could compete and help us? Like it felt like a very petty move, which knowing that company and the history of that company is just how they do things and how they do business.
Hmm.
So that disappoints me immensely. And maybe I'm wrong. Maybe it just decided on the Wednesday, hey, we're gonna cut him, and they did it on a Friday. I don't think so.
Hmm. Moving to Gaijin before we basically I don't have any retort to that because I was just curious on that because I have my opinions on the personality thing. I've I've interacted with Gable quite a bit since he was a kid.
Hmm.
One of the first I first met him when he was in the fifth grade. I didn't think the personality was the issue. I don't know. I just like People always explain, well, he didn't have the personality. You don't know him. So, well, he didn't have the personality of Kurt Angle on The Rock. Well, they were really stiff when they started. I
They
mean,
were, and
now we have everything. Like Ohio Valley, I guess I'm going to spend a little time on this. Ohio
go
Valley,
first.
for example, back in the day, wasn't televised except for a very small, like the internet really was in its formative years, especially with video, when Kurt Angle and Dwayne Johnson were coming into their own. They're like John Cena's dark matches in OVW. Chris Moen, who works at USA Wrestling, was in OVW with John Cena, who was prototype back then.
Mhm.
That stuff's not out there. Dark matches with Shawn Stasiak and Brock Lesnar. There might be one out there, but like this stuff of they're getting their reps in. They weren't publicized. They weren't out there for everybody to scrutinize and look at. Whereas NXT is there right now. Every offshoot, the AF, AWF that's up here. I don't even know, American Wrestling, whatever, all the indies, they're streamed. I mean, Flow even had a vertical called Flow Slam for
that.
indie wrestling. There's Major League Wrestling. There's all these circuits that are now streamed every week. You get to see everybody, as you said, how the sausage is made. You get to see it from the cow getting slaughtered, and then that's streamed, and then the casing is there, and then by the time they put it on your plate, you've already seen everything. So there's no surprise factor. And I'm speaking as a former mark here. I mean, I still watch it periodically, so I can't say I'm not a pro wrestling fan these days like I was when I was 12. So let's put it in that perspective. But it's just like there's so many things you get to see now as a pro wrestling fan with the personalities from people that are coming over from our world into their world. It's like, it's not the same. You can't compare Kurt Angle's upbringing to Gable Steveson. Just, you know more about him than you did Brock. I mean, the difference between Kurt and Brock and their rise was a lot of hidden, a lot of behind the curtain. So that's where I sit on it. It's like everything's scrutinized now because, he's not good on NXT. Like literally you saw him once and you're judging an entire, potential, like The Rock was booed unmercifully when he was Rocky Maivia because he was pushed down everybody's throat. Even the tribal chief Roman Reigns was booed unmercifully when the universe thought they were being shoved down his throat. So I don't know. I think there's some of that, and I think some of it is just pro wrestling fans get a pro wrestling fan.
Yeah, there's a lot to that where like they're super judgmental of everything, fans specifically. There's also a case too, like there's a guy named Brad Armstrong who was a wrestler in the 80s and 90s who was remarkably talented.
Lightning Express Brad Armstrong, right?
That would be him.
Him
Son
and
of the
Tim
Bullet.
Horner?
Yep, that would be right.
Wow.
So that's nice job. When I talk about Brad Armstrong is he was very talented in the ring, but you would put him on a microphone and he would just struggle. Like he had a real hard time projecting his personality through through television. But they talk about him backstage, and the dude was a cut up. The dude was entertaining. He was super fun to be around. But for some reason, when that red light came on the camera, that was lost in translation. And that happens sometimes where guys, and there's other guys who are super quiet, but for some reason, when the camera comes on, their personality just changes and they really shine through. And so there's a lot of times you see that personality just doesn't translate. And so do I think he was ever going to get a fair shot? No, I don't. And a lot of it's stuff that wasn't his fault. That being said,
it's also bad internet searches that don't go away. That's another story entirely.
I'm not going to touch that because of my position in the pro wrestling world that is going to make my life a living hell. So I'm not going to say that, but I don't think you're wrong. I just don't think it was a good fit. I don't think it was a good fit for him. I think that if he went to Japan and tried it out there where it's a little bit more sports based and less personality based or less entertainment based, I think that could have been a different story for him. I think he would have done better, and transitioned easier because the WWE system is built to make guys that are good. And here's the thing, guys that come through NXT that start in NXT, if they don't make it in WWE, 9 times out of 10, you never hear from them again. Guys who started in the indies and really like pro wrestling, if they don't make it in WWE, they'll wind up back on the indies, they'll wind up in Japan or they'll wind up in AEW, and they can still find a good level of success. Whereas the people that WWE brings in typically aren't wrestling fans from the get-go. So like if it doesn't work out, they're like, oh, I guess this is over for me. That's not everybody. There's been a lot of people. Yeah, a lot of people come in and they wind up
through the performance center. I remember when I went down to Greco trials in Daytona, and this was one of my issues that I had with the WWE with trying to get to an NXT taping. I was told one thing, got there, oh sorry, and I saw Clayton Jack, I saw Courtney Freeman. I saw Eric Thompson. I saw Christian Boley. I saw a bunch of these heavyweights in on tryout camps. So they were
Hmm.
all their phones had to be put away. So, and then they go in for the athletes. The next in line thing. They see, Adeline's run the ropes for him in a time. We've seen a clip of that here and there. But I
Hmm.
want to actually, there's one last thing I want to talk about before, again, we get
Sure,
to
sure.
why you're on the show. Of course, this is what I warned my wife earlier. I'm like, this show could go an hour, it could go 3 hours, just based on the way we're kind of wired similarly. And it's the Iron Claw. And what brought me out was what talk about Brad Armstrong and his mic work. And there's a scene in the Iron Claw where, Kevin Von Erich famously struggles on the mic, and then David picks it up for him. Kerry was better. If you grew up not knowing what I'm talking about, World Class Championship Wrestling for me was on ESPN at 4 o'clock, and it was about a month or two behind the actual timeline. So sometimes you'd see somebody moving from one territory to the next. I always remember Al Perez showing up on, Friday Night Wrestling on TBS, and he's just showed up in World Class. I'm like, wait, no. And the timeline was not the same. So there was a little bit of a delay, but I grew up watching World Class Championship Wrestling. The Iron Claw, professional wrestling movie, I guess got some pretty good acclaim. I watched it on the plane. What were your thoughts of it, being a guy that knows the industry and being a guy that's covered the industry, to somebody that's also grow up watching in the same era we did? What were your thoughts on the film?
So as a film, I loved it. I thought it was
Because you're a
excellently
filmmaker,
made.
that's the
Mhm.
angle too. I gotta keep forgetting.
I I went to film school. That's my degree, is in film. I spent 20 years in film and video. Um, I thought it was just an excellently made movie. I thought Zac Efron and Jeremy Allen White are phenomenal in the movie. I thought it told an amazing story. I was blown away by the actual filmmaking of it. Now, the documentarian in me goes, well, this isn't really what happened. There was actually another brother who died. It's actually a worse story. Like reality. Okay,
Yeah,
as hard as it is to watch the Iron Claw, the real life story is actually worse. Like it's actually worse. They had to truncate everything to make it fit into a 2-hour movie, and it's a shame because you lose so much more of the tragedy. Like, and the filmmaker even said is we had to cut some of it back because we just didn't think people would believe everything bad that happened to the Von Erichs. Like
yeah.
it's
I
just
mean,
we
I remember growing
if you
up when
can
David died. I remember like, what? And then another one died, and then another one. Like, what the hell's going on here with this family?
like it just Kevin's the only one left, and it's not like this happened over time. Carrie died in '93, so it's been 30 years, and it's still Kevin's still alive, and his boys are in AEW right now, and like it's just a shame. Like it's a shame isn't even the right word for it. It's just so awful. But the
Mhm.
movie, as far as like a film goes, it's similar to Foxcatcher, right?
That's what I was
Foxcatchers
gonna
are really
actually
made.
pitch. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Foxcatchers are really made a really well made movie, but it's a really hard watch for us because like it's the worst of what our culture is like. And like I was friends with Ed Geesey, so he told me all the Foxcatcher farm stories, when I was in my 20s. So I knew a lot of them, but I also know that they had to embellish and change things just to make it a movie. Like, when you adapt something to film, there's differences that are going to happen. They have to. So you don't get the whole story, but you get a slice of it and you get a taste of it. Um, I think that Iron Claw is a better film than Foxcatcher. I think the acting is just better. I think the story was just better. I think it played true to reality a little bit more. So I liked and I enjoyed Iron Claw. I didn't enjoy Foxcatcher. I left Foxcatcher feeling dirty. Right. I felt filthy after
That
Foxcatcher.
I think that's more us.
What's they're
I
going
think
for?
that
It is.
it's just
It is.
us.
It is.
You
It's
know,
hard. It's hard to see the forest from the trees when you live, in the grass. It's just this is my life, and I know a lot of these people, and it's just it made me feel bad. Whereas the Iron Claw, I know a lot of this. I knew the story beforehand, but I think that when you come out of the Iron Claw, there's a sense of hope in Kevin, like that Kevin never gives up the hope of his family, he never gives up the love of his family, and you feel for Kevin, and you leave the movie, even though there's so much tragedy, you leave the movie feeling better than I left feeling Foxcatcher. Foxcatcher, I left feeling like this is disgusting, right? It was just, and that was the filmmaker's intent. So the both movies are successful in what the stories they're trying to tell. It's just one story makes you feel better than the other, but they're both awful, awful stories.
yeah, I think my inclination on, or my feeling with Foxcatcher, and I've also said this before, is when I watched it, I wasn't around wrestling when Dave was killed in '96, so I was just getting into it. That
Same.
Olympics is when I was watching it for from a hospital waiting room. Most of it. I mean, I remember watching Kendall and Angle win from, Children's Hospital King's Daughters in Norfolk, and I was sitting there and I just going through watching it, and then just for me it was experiencing that tragedy for the first time in a way that I've been. You don't really ask people about the story. You just kind of have picked it up over the years because it's against one of those things we hate talking about. I'm not going to ask Nancy about these type of things ever. I've asked Xander one or two things over the years about it, but for the most part, it's like experiencing it. I was like, my wife, I remember asking her, she asked me, what do you think? It's like, I hated it. I mean, I thought I liked the movie, but I hated the movie. It's like,
Same.
I love college football, but I hate college football because I know what it does to our world of Olympic sports, non-revenue sports. So it's kind of that thing. I thought it was a decent movie. I thought it was good. And then but I hated it because I knew the outcome. And it's just, you feel icky. You're like, and then you get into the whole revisionist history, like, what could we have done? Or, there's people pointing fingers 30, 40 years later. It's like, really? Come on, nobody knows. But anyway, I was just curious on the Iron Claw because that's the first thing I thought of too was Foxcatcher. Foxcatcher is to our wrestling as Iron Claw is to pro wrestling is kind of how I've kind of termed this.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a pretty good parallel to draw between those. Similar films, both very quiet, indie films, right? Not so much, staying away from the big budget, I think Iron Claw would have benefited from a bigger budget because there's a lot of like big moments they just couldn't do on that budget. Like when Kerry wins the title in Texas Stadium, that's a massive moment in real life, right? That's a big triumphant moment in that family's history. In the movie, they play it off like you're watching it on TV. Like you're literally watching the screen where it happens. You're seeing the real footage. So you lose that big presence, right? And it doesn't do it justice. A lot of the pro wrestling in the movie, I don't think is done justice. They had the worst casting for Ric Flair I've ever seen. You want to talk about a guy who everybody has an impression of? It's Ric freaking Flair, and they get a guy who can't even do the woo right. I'm like, this is terrible. Like,
I don't even want to try to do the woo. I've got a cold right now. Woo! I don't know. That's probably even better. We got an RPA announcer at St. Cloud State prior to me when he retired. His thing was he did a woo. And I don't do the woo because that's his thing. Offering. So I set the crowd up. They do the woo. I don't do the woo. But the woo is I have the Ric Flair woo on the intro to this show because, 16-time world heavyweight champion. I've got 16 awards sitting ahead of me, 16 time. That's why Ric Flair's in the front of the show, folks. Anyway, there's always still a pro wrestling mark in me somewhere. Now, here's the transition you've been waiting for. This guy didn't tell me about Brad Armstrong. This is on screen. I have a Jim Cornette action figure that my buddy Nate, the aforementioned best man, he sent it to me one time. He sent it to me with this, and I brought out all my pro wrestling toys for this show. An unopened 24 karat gold Goldberg car for WCW. I don't even know how much this thing is. It's maybe $5 on eBay. But he sent me both of these together because he back to those days where I'm updating Intermat, watching Monday Night Raw. But here comes the fun stuff. I've talked about this before. I'm going to go through the oldest things I have in my life when it comes to professional wrestling, and I want you to tell me who they are and what they are. Starting right now, again. So if this is listening, you might want to go to the video. Who's that guy?
That the Iron Sheik?
That's Team Sheiky, baby. Team Sheiky, may he rest in peace. So I have an Iron Sheik pro action figure here. Next, this one's pretty easy. I got the Macho Man. Got the Macho Man. I'm going to say, I'm going to get the worst one out of the way now because there's a story behind this guy.
Oh, that would be Corporal Kirshner.
That would be Corporal Kirshner. Why do I have this? Because some other kid got the Hulk Hogan one before I did at a KB toy store at Patrick Henry Mall in Newport News, Virginia. I walked in, I saw Hulk Hogan right there, never seen him in the rack of the LJN toys, went over to my mom across the wherever they were at. Can I get the Hulk Hogan one? Yes. By the time I went back and get it, some other kid is in the line with it. So I settled for Corporal Kirshner.
I want to put a pin in Corporal Kirshner because that's going to become relevant later in our conversation. So remind me to bring up Corporal Kirshner again.
All right. Happy Valentine's Day. Probably one of my most hated heels of all time. And I recycle this meme every year on February 14th. It's a picture of this guy's ugly mug. No offense, Greg. Please don't come kill me. You probably still could. He was a certifiable badass. Happy Valentine's Day with an angry, scowling Greg the Hammer Valentine.
He
You
broke
know,
Wahoo's leg.
JYD,
That'd be the
Junkyard
junkyard
Dog.
dog,
Love the
king of
JYD.
New Orleans.
Big John Stud.
Big John Stud.
Big John Stud. I got two left. One of which I'm saving the best for last because if those of you that listen to pro wrestling podcasts and such with Conrad Thompson, for example, will get this reference especially. But this is strange because I live in Minnesota and I have Jesse the Body Ventura right here. I never actually remember watching him ever perform or compete, whatever you want to call it, because he was already in the broadcast booth by the time I got into it. So there's an action figure, and I'm like, is that the guy that was in Predator? That the movie it's rated R that I can't I can't watch because it was rated R. Yeah, yeah.
So he like when he came to WWF in '84, he because he was big in Minnesota AWA, right? Him and Adrian Adonis were a big tag team, and they jumped over to WWF. And almost immediately after he signed with Vince McMahon, they found out he had blood clots in his lungs. So like to justify keeping him on the roster, they made him a commentator because he was just so damn charismatic, and that wound up being like the second. Oh, it was genius. He is he's not the first heel commentator. That had been Roddy Piper in Georgia in the early 80s, but he's the best. He's the most famous, and it started a new career for him. So yeah, Jesse was awesome in that.
And
that'd be Brutus Barber Beefcake.
The effing Barber Beefcake. So, yeah, those
awesome,
my mom actually brought those back for me like 2 summers ago with all my baseball cards, and I'm like, oh my goodness, I had the ring and everything. Like I said, I mean, these things are 30 some years old, probably closer to 40 years old now I think about it.
Closer to 40 because they signed that deal. The first deal is 85. So yeah, we're knocking on the door of 30. And those are the LGNs. Those aren't the later ones. I think Hasbro made the later ones. Those are the big guys.
No, these don't have any. These do not have kung fu grip. These are not. You're not fighting with your Joes on this thing. If you do, it's with. You can't say the M word anymore. So let's just call it micro wrestling, because there's a group out here called the Micro Wrestling Federation, and it's little people wrestling. Because again, you can't say that word anymore.
Can't say the M word.
Yeah, can't say the M word. Now we have set the table up for a good 40 minutes talking about Fargo, talking about my action figures here, which I did fish out of up here. They're actually on display in my speakeasy exit stage right over here. Now we get to the next thing. We'll bring it up on the Kickstarter page. We'll go a little split screen here. So what we've got here, JD, why don't you just tell us what we've got with your Kickstarter? What is this and why are we talking about it?
So I'm an author, as we talked about earlier. This is the Kickstarter campaign for my new novel, Gaijin. Here's the proof copy of it that I have right here to show you it's done. Like I'm not telling you, hey, please fund me while I sit around and write a book. No, I wrote a book, and Kickstarter is an awesome way to sell it, and I'll explain it why in a minute. So you mentioned Corporal Kirshner earlier. Corporal Kirshner is a guy who came into the WWF in '85 after Sergeant Slaughter leaves, and he gets to be the new big American hero, and is a complete and total failure. He washes out.
He's the JV. He's the knockoff. He's the tenant of Sergeant Slaughter's.
Now, what happens to Corporal Kirshner is he goes to Japan in the early 90s and reinvents himself as a deathmatch wrestler by the name of Leatherface, as in from the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. So he dressed as Leatherface and competed in the Japanese Indies, running down to the ring with a chainsaw in his hands and all that stuff, and had a second career in Japan. It's funny you mention it because this is pretty much the concept behind this story. Gaijin is also
not scripted. This, unlike several things in the world of sports, this conversation we're having is not scripted. I just happen to have my Corporal Kirchner character, and it sets up perfect. This is fate, JD.
Homie, this is wrestling. When someone takes a shot on you, you got to be ready to defend and adjust and scramble when you weren't planning for it. It's what we do. It's the life we live. So this is a book about an American professional wrestler who washes out of the biggest company, and he gets a second chance in Japan. Right. But the guy's got a lot of baggage. He's got a lot of demons. And in going to Japan for the first time, he inadvertently becomes a drug mule. So he sneaks in a bunch of amphetamine into Japan and winds. And the opening sequence of the book is him sneaking in these drugs into Japan, and they search his bag and they go, "What's this?" And they pull out his mask. So it's kind of a plan that the opening scene in Midnight Express, the movie, not the tag team. So the story is about this American,
not the original Midnight Express, or not the Midnight Express, but the one that you never want to reference when in Istanbul, like I was a month ago.
Yes, it's same exact trip I took and thought the exact same thing. So yeah, this guy goes to Japan and he winds up becoming something. He sees how much money he makes and doesn't really want to be a pro wrestler anymore, and inadvertently turns himself into something to something of a linchpin in a an underground drug operation in Tokyo, and runs afoul of the Yakuza. So what
It's like
man
running
that's
afoul of the
the
McMahons. You don't really want to do that.
yeah, yeah, you don't really want to do that. So, and the Yakuza are very big into the Japanese pro wrestling scene, and they, it's that's the story. So, what makes this book a little bit different is we have our story, our noir story, right? We have a story about a bad guy doing bad things. I parallel this with the pro wrestling story. His character. We the character of the Black Phoenix, that's who his character name is, comes into this tournament, and he is an assassin for the lead heel in the company, the American heel, the Gaijin. Gaijin being a Japanese term for foreigners, a derogatory term, but it is a Gaijin, and it's very associated with pro wrestlers in Japan. So in this tournament, this guy is supposed to knock off all the competition for his former best friend, and while he's doing that, he wins over the crowd and becomes a beloved babyface. So we start off with our, one half of his personality, the real guy, and then the real guy is a decent guy who's made a lot of mistakes, who's trying to figure out his next life, and winds up becoming an even bigger piece of crap. Whereas his alter ego is a horrible human being who winds up becoming this beloved babyface. I don't pretend this is real, right? Like, this is written in kayfabe. So a lot of the turn, it's throughout the course of like a Japanese wrestling tournament, which is, 24 men, round robin style. We explain that in the book. So what's different is, like, I don't play this off like it's real. Like,
You're not pulling
it's
the
told
curtain
from the kid.
back.
No, I am
As
pulling the curtain
they
back.
use,
Oh no,
but
we're using this. Like, there's like like a lot of the stuff is done through like podcast transcripts. We do interviews. Like, it's done in wrestling. Like, because even in wrestling, they admit that it's all BS, right? So we
oh,
do
okay,
that.
I got you. I
So
got
it's
you.
like
So it's
it's like it's written for a wrestling fan specifically. So if you like pro wrestling, you're gonna get what I'm doing. Like, there's very much winks and nods to Dave Meltzer and the Wrestling Observer culture and that whole thing. Like, there's star ratings for stuff like that, and these guys take their career seriously, right? So it's very much balancing out how to, like, wrestling fandom with this horrendous thriller that goes through. And I remember I had a couple people who read the preview for the book. And I had one girl who's a podcaster, who's a friend of mine. She called me and she yelled at me for the ending. She's like, "How could you do this? How could you do this?" And I said, "It's the way the story had to end." And she's like, "I know, but
that's how
how
you know
could
it's
you
your best
do
work,
this?"
right? A little
I
Harold
know. That's
Crick
when I got
action.
super proud. I'm like, I got him. It worked. And like, so I was really thrilled when I got that call. So yeah, it's a very different kind of thrill. And what's cool about Kickstarter, if I put this on Amazon, I just run a marketing campaign, you sell the book, it's whatever. When you do a Kickstarter, there's various levels of stuff you can do. So like $5, you get the ebook. Very simple. The whole thing is right there. If you like reading on your phone or on your Kindle, something like that, very cool. You can also get the paperback, which I got right here, right? You can also get the hardcover, which is really cool. We have audio books. And what's really cool about Kickstarter is you got to create extra stuff to give people a reason to back. I created the
Mm.
program for the tournament. So there's actually I teach Photoshop, right? So this is kind of what I do. Like, so I built the program, right? And I took like the entries from like the handbook of the Marvel universe, and I kind of mirrored that because I have all these wrestlers that I created who I don't really get to do a whole lot with. They just in the story for a minute. But now in this, I had an artist draw up renditions of what they look like, and I got to go through their history. So like, if you were at the arena and you bought the program, you could see it, right? And the brackets are in there. You can track the tournament as it goes along. So I mean, it's just a little extra that's kind of fun. You get the digital version of that, and you got the print version of that, and you also have access to all of my books, all 14 of them. You can buy a couple, you can buy all of them, you can do the whole kit and caboodle, which again, in digital or in paperback.
I got
right?
4 or 5. I'm still backed up on reading right now, just because I'm working on reading one book a month this year. That's my resolution. So,
Hey,
I've
hey
got
man,
about
you got
3 more
one.
days to.
You got one. I appreciate it greatly.
Yeah.
We also did the mask. Like, you can get the Black Phoenix mask. We have that available. My most favorite thing that I do in all my Kickstarter campaigns.
Now, is it like
really
a luchador
successful.
mask?
It is like a
Like that
luchador
style?
mask. It's very
Okay.
it's very similar
Gotcha.
to the one that we created for the marketing campaign right there. You can get that mask. So what else is cool too is you can become a character. It's the number one tier that we have in all my books. Is like, it's like $250, but you get to become a character in the book. Right. There's the cover actually for the program that you're showing right now. We created that. So like, yeah, you want to jump in, you can actually be a character. We sold 2 of those. They're going to be people that you get written into the story. Right. And it's a lot of fun. So yeah, here you go through the Kickstarter page. It tells you who all the characters are, what the relationships are. It just kind of preps you for reading the book. And it's
Is Matt
Kickstarter's a real
Bradley's kind of look is who is that tailored after? First thing I see when I look at him is AJ Styles, but
sure. I mean,
who's
honestly,
your
God, it's
inspiration there?
what the artist wanted to do. I kind of gave him the book and let him kind of go off and do his own thing. So again, yeah, here's our lead Yakuza guy. Guy falls, he of course our hero falls in love. She's got a scumbag brother who's a piece of crap.
Yeah,
So I mean, like these are all like
the Japanese Gaijin love story.
mhm,
Mr. Baseball tried to do that too.
very true, very similar. So yeah, doing a Kickstarter gives you a chance to just do some cool things with a book that you normally don't get to do.
No, it's
Right.
great.
And it's just a lot of fun to release a Kickstarter and kind of go outside the box with how you present your work. Because again, in 6 months, this thing will go live on Amazon and it'll just be a book that, it's fine. We'll sell some copies and it'll be really cool. But when you release it on Kickstarter, you get to kind of make an event of your book. And Kickstarter not only allows you to do cool things, they want you to do cool things. This isn't a GoFundMe campaign where I'm like, hey man, let me fund me while I chase my dream. No, this isn't like that.
Hmm.
This book is done. Like there's no wait 8 months for it to go through. When the second the campaign ends, the money hits my account, I start sending out emails with the digital version. The orders go in to Amazon. They ship you your books. Right. It's totally different. This just gives me a chance to do something fun. Right. To give people an extra reason to jump in on this book early and to do some neat things. Right. That traditional book selling doesn't allow you to do. Like I'm a big fan of crowdfunding stuff just because it's more fun. Like it gives me a reason to come on shows like this and talk about the cool projects that I'm working on and do, hey, we got all this cool stuff that it's not just a book, it's the experience of a book. Cause like when you're writing a book, you're all in. Like when I was writing this thing, I wrote a lot of this when I was at Fargo 2 years ago. Like I would leave the dome and I would go to the Panera across the street from our hotel because Team Illinois doesn't stay in the dorms. Come on, man. We stay in a hotel. We're snobs.
You got 17,000 kids because you got a whole new team that comes in for freestyle from Greco because
This
you
is
know you
also
guys
true.
actually qualify it. Yeah, hey, I will. I'm fine slumming up in a single bed for 8 days, and although
I'm
I got air
spoiled.
conditioning where I'm at.
I've been spoiled by Team Illinois for years. So yeah, but this is what I do. I went to the Panera across the street from my hotel, and I spent a couple hours a day just knocking out the pages of my book, man. I'm real proud of this one, and it's really cool. And I'm doing a short story coming off this that's right now I'm doing chapter by chapter on the Mike and JD Show Patreon page, which is a lot of fun. But this is like I said, this is the best book I've ever written, and I'm real excited just to get it out there and get people reading it. Like I said, if pro wrestling isn't your thing, I think you'll dig on the thriller elements of it because it's a nitty gritty crime story at its heart, and the pro wrestling is just it's just something I wanted to do. I was listening to a Colt Cabana podcast one day, and he talked about meeting some Yakuza guys, and I thought that'd be kind of cool to do a story about an American wrestler in Japan who gets in trouble with the Yakuza. And I developed this story actually with DC Comics over the course of a year. It was going to be some part of their Vertigo line, and then that died. They stopped doing Vertigo, so then they never went forward with it. So I had this idea and I was just waiting for the right time. And I've been doing so much work in pro wrestling over the years. Like this predates all the stuff that I've done. And now I feel like, well, I understand that world enough where I can make this more real than it would have been before. So I mean, all the experience that I've had and the people that I've met, and like I talked to some pro wrestlers that have been back and forth to Japan, Filthy Tom Waller being one of them, about how like he gave me some really good advice for some stuff on this to just make it feel more real. My buddy John Muse, who was has an amazing story about his time with WCW, he helped me book the actual tournament aspect of this. So I mean, it's a lot of cool. This is like nothing I've ever written before, and nothing I'm ever going to write again. It's very unique unto itself.
Tom Lawler, interesting backstory too. Wrestled at Central
Very.
Florida, 235 pounds in the NCWA. Actually saw him wrestle Mike Faust. The year Faust, I think, was an All-American at Virginia Tech at the Carolina Open. Yeah. Not to mention his short-lived podcast with Front Row Brian, or the artist formerly known as Front Row Brian. That's a
He's
weird
still got
callback there.
podcasts. He still does stuff with the Wrestling Observer to this day. He's wrestling with MLW and New Japan. He's a really cool dude. Really got kind of hosed in the UFC, and he's reinvented himself as a pro wrestler, and he's a damn good one, and he's a super cool guy.
Now, get into the book as far as inspirations. Like you talk about those people. Where do you draw some of the inspiration for the characters? Is it from like time growing up in the 80s and 90s watching it, or is it more current era? Because you're still actively watching professional wrestling. So where is the amalgamation of characters coming from?
It's definitely more inspired from what's going on today in Japan specifically. Like it's centered around a G1 style tournament. The G1 is this big event that New Japan does every year. It's 24-man round robin tournament. It takes the whole month of like late July through early September, and it's this tour that they go on, and it determines who's going to challenge for the title at their January 4th show. So I mirrored that. I did the same thing, and a lot of the characters aren't like one to one, but I mean, there's some like inspiration of who is who, and I took some inspiration from guys that are older, and but for the most part, a lot of them are original or come from my brain. There's definitely some guys that are inspired by people, but no one that I'd say is like a one-to-one clone or anything like that.
How hard is it to come up with kind of an original concept, considering everything we know about professional wrestling characters and their gimmicks and whatnot? A lot of them are just recycled, repackaged over the years. Okay, well, let's try this guy with this look this time. I mean, you've got that knowledge, that base. So again, how hard was it to find something? It's like, okay, this works. This might work in Japan. Let's try that angle, or take this Americanized version and try to put it in Japan. Like, how does all that come together?
There's no such
And
thing as
I'm saying
original
also
idea.
speaking as more of a writer, not from a
Mhm.
not from just a fan standpoint, but from a character development standpoint.
It's a great question. I'm a firm believer that there's no such thing as an original idea. There's three stories that you can tell, and it all comes down to execution. Like a story is basically you have a protagonist who has a goal, right? He's on his way toward his goal. Something is standing in his way. That's a story. Like that is Robert McKee. That is like literally my college textbook, the fundamentals of how you craft a story. Now, from there, you have the beats and you have your 3 act structure and everything filters through there to create it. So I'm of the mind that it does nothing to do with like the idea. All ideas are kind of superfluous. Like they don't really matter. What it really comes down to when you're crafting a story is how intriguing are your characters? How much can a reader or a viewer or whatever connect with the people you've created, and that's where stories live and die. Like, 'cause, like the high concept gets you in the door, right? Like one of my favorite books. It's about a killer clown. No, it's about 6 kids that come from a white trash background that are trying to move on from their childhood trauma. But you tell that story through an evil mutant clown, and all of a sudden you've got something that you can entice people into. But that's not really what it's about, right? And this is the same thing. Like this is a pro wrestling, thriller book, but it's really about a guy who's not comfortable in his own skin, who's trying to be something that he's not. Right. So for me, it all comes down to character at the end of the day. Right. So if I have a unique concept, like I'm a high concept guy, like I'll have this idea for a big concept. But if I can't go back and figure out who the people are, it's not worth my time. Because I'm like, again, I'm a firm believer the concept gets you in the door. Like Star Wars is big space battles and laser swords and all this stuff. It's about a farm kid who's looking to be more than he is. Right. And it's super relatable at its core. And if it isn't that when you break it down, and then you don't have something. Right. So I think this story it is super relatable. It does feature characters that you can believe are real people. They're just in a weird situation, and that is really what kind of intrigues me. Like I don't want to write like straight drama. I could never write a story just about a dude doing a thing. Like it's got to be something different, or else why do it? And then it becomes all metaphor. Like my first book I ever wrote was a book called Harvest Moon. It was about a cop who's a werewolf. Right, he's investigating a serial killer who turns out to be a werewolf. It turns out to be him. Like that was my first book that I ever wrote, and that was really a story about dealing with an alcoholic father. Right. That was me. I didn't even realize it until I was done writing, and I realized, oh my god, I just dealt with my dad. Like, so that's what writers do: is we try to work on the stuff that's bugging us through our work, and if we can do that through something cool that gives you a hook, and you don't even realize that's what we're doing, then we've done our job. Like I said, I'm a huge Stephen King fan, and like he does all kinds of these crazy stories, but at the end of the day, they're all like super down to earth and relatable when you cut them to the core.
What's going to prevent you from, or well, actually, I don't even know if this is preventing you or not. So obviously, without giving away the ending, why is this a one book thing versus maybe like your other ones? You've got a series, you've got Chronicles of, you've got kind of a serial type of storytelling here. Why is this a one shot?
maybe it isn't a one shot. When I created it, it was a one shot. But
Spoiler.
well, I don't know if it is a spoiler or not because I did an interview yesterday with my buddy Garrett Gonzalez on the Wrestling Observer Radio Network with my in the pro wrestling world, and he read the book and he's like, "You've got a whole world here that you've created." So for me, it just was about telling this one story that I really wanted to tell, and maybe there is more there than I realized. I am I am right now creating a short story, a novella that kind of comes from this world and it's different, but it's in this world. So I got to kind of play with that and see if maybe there is more to it. I'm not a guy who thinks like 10 books down the line or 10 stories down the line. My job is to make this one thing work and make it good. I think sometimes in movies, like they get away from that. They think like, we'll do this movie and then we have 10 different sequels we could do and we could do this and this and this. And I think you kind of get too far from what works. Like Iron Man. Iron Man, they had ideas for what they could do from Iron Man, but Iron Man at its core was a great movie. And if it was one movie done, that'd have been an awesome flick. So I think for me right now with Gaijin, I need to just get this one story out and then see where it can go from there. Because there's things I can do. At the moment, it's really about just feeling this one book and then I don't know, see what the reaction is. Because again, I've been being pushed into doing more that I didn't think was possible before then, but maybe I'm wrong. So we'll kind of I'm gonna revisit that in probably 6 months.
So we got the potential now because when you're explaining it, the program is what jumps out to me. Is now you've got backstories. You can go and you can Disney Plus Star Wars the heck out of this, even though you're
Good.
not thinking 10 books in advance. You've got branching stories. I mean, you could eventually tell a story like, oh well, I don't know who the characters in the tournament are, but I'm saying hypothetically, if there's another Gaijin in the tournament, like did he struggle in just Georgia Championship Wrestling for 30 years and just, that guy? What's that guy's story? What is like, let's use current example, current topics like Cody Rhodes. His success story is more, it's recent. I mean, he had a lot of years building up to being, kind of kicking the tires and just paying his dues for an extremely long time before he became who he is. So I see there's so many different, that's one thing I like about, again, getting into the pro wrestling thing where it kind of tweaks my inner mark now that there's no secret that the curtain is pulled back. I listen to Bruce and Tony Schiavone quite frequently about stories
Mhm.
from when I grew up, what happened when with the WCW era, and then of course Bruce Pritchard with something to wrestle with whatever the fun thing is. Like these tap into my inner kiddom too. So I think about, well, the character development when I hear about these guys talk about, well, why is this guy this? Why did Vince come up
Mhm.
with this? I mean, that really kind of just speaks to me, and
Me
again,
too.
coming from having a little bit of that, and it kind of talks to the marketing now. You've got a niche type of fan base you're kind of marketing this to. So where is the pluses and minuses into marketing something to a community that is notoriously fickle and sometimes very bullheaded?
That's the first time someone's asked me that question. I'm super excited to talk about this. So when you talk about independent fiction, right? Writing today, like the writing business, if you're not Stephen King or, James Patterson or one of these like legacy writers, it's hard to get one of the big five publishers to get on board with what you do because they spend so much money that they want to make sure they get a return on their investment, right? It costs so much to market a book. And unless you're kind of in the click, it's hard to get in. I did a seminar with a guy named J.D. Barker who wrote the sequel to Dracula with Bram Stoker's great nephew called Dracul. He's done a bunch of stuff with James Patterson, and his advice was do everything independent, unless they're giving you life changing advance money. Which, by the way, if you get in advance and you don't sell all those books, you will have to pay that money back. So that's a downside to that. So this is advice he's giving me. He's like, you just do everything independently. Don't take anybody, do everything yourself. So I'm of that mind. And when you're doing stuff independently, it's really about exploiting a niche, right? Everyone always tells you this book. The reason I wrote this book is because I did with my supernatural thrillers and stuff like that. I was told that they're not tropey enough. Like it doesn't exploit the supernatural fiction tropes enough, and that's the problem with them. And I got really mad when I heard about that because I don't like when they said when you were in this world, you have to hit all these tropes. You have to have A, you have to have B, you have to have C, or else the thought is your book doesn't sell. So when I did this book, this is me rebelling against that and saying, "Oh, you want something tropey, huh? You want something super tropey? All right, I'm going to give you the tropiest book that I can give you, and I'm going to market specifically to this." group of people. And if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. Like this is me just really, you know, kind of lashing out at the independent writing world and doing something that literally maybe only appeals to me, right? And that's okay. So I'm this is me expressing my creativity and like, doing what I want to do. But I do have enough of a base in that world, in both the amateur wrestling and the professional wrestling world. I do have enough people who know what I am and respect what I'm doing that I think I can make this work. And if it doesn't, that's fine. I wrote a book that I'm super proud of, that I love, and not everything you do is going to be a success. Not everything you do is going to change the world. And that's perfectly fine. Like I said, I love this book, and people who've read it so far tell me they really like it. So, and oftentimes, like, when you put out art, sometimes it doesn't connect. Big Trouble in Little China is one of my favorite movies, and that was a complete disaster at the box office when it came out. The Thing is the greatest horror movie that was ever made, and people didn't connect with it at all when it came out. And, sometimes, art is just a thing that time and a place. Maybe this is time and a place, maybe it isn't. If it isn't, oh well, I tried something and I did something that I was proud of.
Any inspiration from John Carpenter on that? Because you just mentioned The Thing, and Big Trouble in Little China is also one of my favorite movies too. You know what Jack Burton says at a time? Who? Jack Burton.
Jack Burton.
Me.
Me.
Oh my goodness. Oh, just egg shit.
The works
man.
of
Just
the works
so
of Carpenter,
I could,
they're super important to guys of our age group, right? Because we were younger when those movies came out. We didn't have those expectations that people might have had. And like they're genre bendy, right? Where that kind of works for our generation, whereas people that were older than us, the baby boomers, maybe didn't feel that kind of stuff. So again, like being ahead of your time can be a bad thing. It can be a great thing too. Like people look back on Carpenter. I love Carpenter. He's one of my favorite filmmakers. I think he's a genius. They Live. We reviewed it in my podcast with Mike Gilbert. Like we just talked. I adore
one.
that movie. Yep.
Oh man.
He's one of my favorite filmmakers, and I think a lot of his work gets vastly ignored. And I think that now people look back on him as a genius, and in his era, people are like, "Oh yeah, it's the guy that made Halloween. Boy, what a disappointing career he had." And when in retrospect, it's like the man just has hit after hit after hit, and he was just ahead of his time.
Yeah, Halloween actually is lower on the list compared to the other ones.
Mine
Now,
too.
Like They Live, I remember, again, this isn't back. This ties back into pro wrestling because Roddy Piper was in the movie. Spoiler alert if you haven't seen something that's 40 years old. And just I don't remember seeing. I remember seeing bits and pieces of it. I think it was one of those things that was rated R, so I couldn't see it at the time. I didn't see that really. I didn't actually. I don't think I didn't watch it until I was in my 30s. I think, or late 20s, early 30s. I might have been living in Pennsylvania. I think that's like my time frame is pre-wife, post-wife. This is definitely a pre-wife movie, so it was definitely I was in my 20s at least because I got married at 29. Sir, I'm sitting there. I'm looking at like, and then when you've made it when The Simpsons reference you, South Park reference you, Family Guy references you, like. The shot-for-shot fight scene in the episode of South Park where they're talking about cripple fight is just, I mean, it took me a second. I'm like, why do I know this? And then I was like, that's from freaking They Live. I didn't need the internet to tell me what that was. I was watching the scene with Timmy and Jimmy. Spoiler alert, another issue of South Park if you haven't seen it. And that fight scene, I'm like, why is that? I got it. Sometimes the Big Trouble in Little China references are usually one-liners, but not a freaking one-shot 8-minute fight scene. I mean, just Carpenter.
It's the greatest fight in movie history.
Me on another tangent.
Yeah. I love doing that. Yeah, it's the greatest fight in movie history. Roddy Piper and Keith David just had this epically, ridiculously long fight scene that plays out so long for a movie fight scene, but it's so awesome. And afterwards, like usually in a fight in a movie, the guys are like fine right afterwards. And Piper and David are just like, they look like they've been beat to crap afterwards. And it's
all to put on a pair of sunglasses.
Great. Yeah, and it's so great.
It's
a movie. It's a movie that I think has so much resonance today. Like again, just ahead of its time. You put that out today and it still makes sense. It's still culturally relevant, maybe even more so now than it was in 1986 when it came out. Like I can't say enough good things about They Live. It's a good movie.
I remember Big Trouble in Little China. I think first time I saw that was on HBO because I didn't go to a theater, but it was when you had HBO that was when they played movies. It was like all right, and it's like what is this? And it's like I think that was Low Pan. I was like what Low Pan? It's just I don't know if I could watch the movie on mute, but I love how Kurt Russell. It's one of those movies that's PG and has an F-bomb in it. You're like, wait, what? Or was it PG-13? I'm not sure, but it was like that and Spaceballs had F-bombs in it, which was like, oh my gosh, what? Hollow? Boom. Like, It's all in the reflexes. You know how many times me and my stepbrother tried to practice the whole we didn't do it with an actual knife, but the whole like I don't know. It just that doesn't work. I didn't have the potion, but yeah. Again, this is what JD conversation with JD had. We do this in Fargo. If he's not like
Oh yeah.
got 15,000 kids to coach, we'll start talking and we're like we will talk about the same conversation. We'll have a 4-day conversation about one thing. It would just hold on, be back, and we'll pick it up. We'll pick it up. Pick it up. So when you reached out to come on the show, it's like absolutely, we're going to talk about just your book mainly, but we'll also go in this pop culture 80s 90s kid tangents too. So I'm enjoying every. You mentioned Big Trouble in
Me
Little
too.
China. I think it's. Do I have it? I got it's on the other side of my wall because I actually own that on DVD too. Let's see. I don't have They Live, but I think I've got that on my Apple TV. But yeah. So the hard copies, yeah. The Big Trouble in Little China is in my early collection.
The classic. I can't wait to show it to
I
my
taped
kid.
it on VHS. I had the Kodak tape on the blank tape and hit. I was the only one in my house that had a program the VCR. So that's how we got all the movies. We'd like, when's it come on? I'd set the time. All right, 12:05. All right, we're getting Big Trouble. We're getting some weird, Short Circuit 2 is coming on. Let's record that.
That's how we grew up, man. That's how you found movies, was on HBO. And I look at my kid now because he lives on YouTube and stuff like that. And I just don't know how they're going to discover stuff, right? Because that was the coolest part about having HBO is you weren't in control of what came on. Like sometimes a movie just came on and there was nothing new. And you sat there and watched it. And sometimes
this
it was Big
guide on the
Trouble in Little
TV.
China.
That was not a thing.
Yeah.
If you didn't either have
No.
TV guide or the newspaper, you keep the Sunday paper for the week. Yeah, it's just like
Sometimes you came up with a good movie. Sometimes you watched Mannequin. But I mean, like it was on HBO.
Another
so
Kim
you watched
Cattrall reference. Wow, that's 3 Jerry Briscoe references, 2 Kim Cattrall references, 1 podcast, folks. Where else are you going to get that? Another one was I remember the the big splash screen with HBO flying through the air. And I remember the first time I ever vividly remember this. I was in the basement of my house in Newport News, and the movie that came on was the Twilight Zone movie. And then,
I was just telling my kid about this movie. Yeah.
Then I remember the first time I ever saw the words PG-13 show up. I was like, oh, what's coming on now? And I remember sitting in my room, in my other house in Newport News. I'm sitting there watching, like, what's coming on now? And it was Red Dawn. And I remember freaking out. And I ran up and told my stepsisters, like, there's a PG-13 movie on. Because I'd never seen one before. I'd never heard. I think that was the first one, actually. But like, it just happened. I just vividly remember these 2 instances of these 2 movies and HBO being and Fraggle Rock, of course. So we've gone from Fraggle Rock to Kim Cattrall references, pro wrestling. What else can we possibly talk about on this episode of the Short Time Wrestling Podcast, JD?
My kid is super into Ghostbusters right now. Like he's a humongous Ghostbusters fan.
Heard the reboots are pretty good.
They're pretty good. I quite enjoy them. He loves them. I enjoy them a lot. So I was telling him about, Ray Stantz, Dan Aykroyd. I'm like, oh yeah. And because I'm a terrible parent, I showed him the beginning of Twilight Zone, the movie. Because it's just Dan. I don't know if you've ever seen it. The beginning of Twilight Zone, the movie, is just Dan Aykroyd and Albert Brooks in a car doing theme songs from old TV shows. Again, relatable character moment. Right? Who hasn't done something like that? So they're doing this and they start doing the Twilight Zone. And Dan Aykroyd goes, you want to see something scary? And Albert Brooks is like, yeah. And Dan's like, nah, it's too scary. He's like, no, show me. He's like, you sure? Yeah, okay. And Aykroyd leans down and he comes back up and he's a demon and he just attacks Albert Brooks. And the movie starts. Then you hear the do and they do the introduction. And I showed that to my kid and scared the crap out of him. And my wife was so pissed at me when that happened. But he just said,
did you show him the ending though too? Did you get to
go
full circle with it?
No, we did not go full circle with it. We just showed him the beginning, and my wife said, you will not show him Twilight Zone, the movie, until he gets older. And I said, all right. So I kind of backed out of that. And that's probably the best because that Lithgow one is pretty scary. Actually, It's awesome.
Well, I fly a lot. So every time I look out the window and I've got the wing, I'm like, seriously, I'm 44. And I'm like, man, I really hope a monster doesn't eat this wing up right now. We're somewhere over Iceland.
It's a super underrated flick, actually. And I quite enjoy Twilight Zone, the movie.
Yeah, I need to go back again. One of these things, I don't listen to the rewatchables, or I'm familiar with the concept. But some of these, like, does the rewatch now? It's like my wife was even bringing this up. Like, if you have to do a horror movie today, you have to do it in an area where you have no cell phones or dead cell phones.
Yeah.
She reads a lot of these novels, like the not true crime, but kind of like, I don't know, she might actually be into this. I might have to get this one for her. But not just me, or she can borrow it after I read her Hunger Games books. She reads my pro wrestling independent novels. Why not? But yeah, it's like you have to like almost be like in a middle of nowhere for your cell phone not to work. Now it's just like, I'm lost. Let's just call a number. So yeah, some things don't hold up anymore.
No, they don't. Well, that's the challenge because I write some horror stuff, and that's I like to use like I'm one of my trademarks in my book is I use technology a lot in my work, and it's like, well, how do you do a horror story in the world with cell phones and computers and stuff like that? And I think I've done a pretty good job of making that stuff work. It's definitely more of a challenge because I have written some stuff that takes place back in the day, and it's definitely like it's easier when you can't Google the answer. I think as a writer, like it's easier to put your characters in jeopardy when they can't Google the answer. But I mean, like, it's cool to do like my Ethan Jericho books today take place in like, in this world and like, you can find everything out that you need to. And it's actually, you can actually make that work in your benefit too as a writer, but it's just different challenges.
You could also just go the whole like post-apocalyptic, everything's been destroyed. So you can't be like,
Yeah.
Alexa, what year did the Twilight Zone movie come out?
Mm-hmm.
The film Twilight Zone. The movie was released in 1983.
Alexa, stop. Oh, there we go. See, my kids don't even Google anymore. My oldest just goes,
No.
because upstairs it's the ECHO. I say lady in the tube in case I wanted this thing to listen to me. So, all right. Circling back, one more shot at the Kickstarter. Gaijin, you can go to, you got a short URL for that, kickstarter.com?
No, I
search for
really
Gaijin.
screwed that up. I really should have created a short URL for that. I really made that mistake. That was something I screwed up on this campaign. So you just go to Kickstarter and search Gaijin. You'll be able to pull it up pretty quick.
It'll be in the show notes
can back
here
the campaign.
for the video and the audio in case you're interested in checking out this weird. This conversation's been a little weird. The book I'm sure is not. I haven't read it yet because I haven't bought it yet. But yeah, it's totally weird. So
Weird.
yeah, so our Wednesday afternoon conversation. Again, I actually got to throw this reference in there because Creep Show got a reference in the comments here for those watching. So that's a throwback. I remember that one. That and Ghoulies.
Stephen King.
That scared the crap out of me too.
Ghoulies messed me up as a kid, man. I couldn't sit in a toilet for months.
Ghoulies
There's
and
the
Critters.
famous shot.
Critters
Critters
was
didn't
another
bother me as much as Ghoulies is messed up because Ghoulies, the famous shot of the poster of Ghoulies is this, they're both Gremlins ripoffs. Neither one of them are as good as Gremlins, but Ghoulies has this little green monster popping up from a toilet that's just messed up. And then you
Doesn't he have,
watch
like
the movie and it's about
the knife in the mouth, or is it like I feel like there's a short like curved dagger, something.
the curved dagger is from Trilogy of Terror, the little voodoo doll type things in Trilogy of Terror. But Ghoulies is just this monster that comes out, and it's about these people that form this like satanic cult, and they raise these demons. And the movie's awful. But as a little kid, again, saw it on like HBO or something like that. Totally messed me up as a little kid.
We now enter the bad HBO horror movie part of this section, and
That's what I'm talking about.
I'm now gonna offer you The Gate. Scared the
Oh,
crap
I've
out
seen
of
The
me.
Gate. Yeah, dude, the part where it's young Ethan Hawke. They look down in the hand. Yeah, they see the eyeball in the hand. They have to stab.
Oh.
This is what I'm talking about. Is sometimes you get Big Trouble in Little China, a classic, and sometimes you get Ghoulies, a complete turd of a movie. But you're gonna watch whole like Troll. I've seen both Troll movies. Neither one of them are good, but
Sometimes you get
both.
Ghoulies too.
Oh, yeah, I saw the Ghoulies movies. I've seen Ghoulies 4, which is really bad. Like, I wasted a lot of time watching HBO growing up.
I mean, you just wrote a Facebook post last week about how much Batman resonated with you, and now we're sitting here talking about another side note. While we talk about you don't know what you're going to get was TBS in the early '90s. After like 9 o'clock, you were going to get every bad 70s horror movie ever. And I can't remember any of these names. I just end up Googling. Yes, we have to Google. Like, Google scene where like Killer Swamp kills people. I'm like, that's too vague. Then, like, I think in the last couple weeks, I've looked up Night of the Lepus, which I actually knew that one. I actually watched
I was just going to say Night of the Lepus. So,
the Swarm,
we were kids.
Yeah, what was it?
Gargoyles.
Army of Ants, or the one with the ants on the island that eat the sugar. There was another one. There was one with the tarantulas that overwhelmed the small town in like New Mexico. I looked at it.
Yeah. Oh my God.
And that had the creepy ending where like nobody heard them. They're gone. And then there was another one with like killer rattlesnakes, which is, you prey on snake spiders and then like, genetically mutated insert fuzzy rabbit here,
When we were kids, TBS had this show on Saturday mornings. And again, I watched TBS because of WCW all the time. And it was Grandpa Al's Morning Theater. And it was from the Munsters. It was Grandpa Al. He hosted it. I'm from Chicago. So we always call it Svengoolie style because Svengoolie is one that still exists where they just show bad movies. Mystery Science Theater would be another comparison to it.
Instead of like in Virginia, Dr. Madblood, and he used Sugarloaf's Green Eyed Ladies, the intro on WTVZ 33. That was the channel that Gorgeous Ladies of Wrestling came on. So we're bringing that back.
Go
in.
glow.
So,
yeah, like
I think Dr.
those
Madblood was
bad
actually professor at
movies.
ODU back in the day too.
Those old movies, right? Shape like that's where I discovered Godzilla and Hammer horror films, right, from England. Like those things, like the reason I write the stuff I do, typically, not Gaijin's a straight thriller, but like my supernatural horror stuff is all because I grew up watching those movies and reading Stephen King and comic books and stuff like that. Like as much as I love wrestling, I also love like schlock horror stuff so much.
Piranha
Like I
was
grew
also
up
one of my favorites.
Piranha.
You know,
James
Jaws
Cameron
Rip.
directed Piranha too. Little trivia note.
The
James Cameron
second one?
Yeah, that was his first movie. Piranha 2.
I never saw it because it was in Blockbuster. I remember looking at it, and again, one of those things where like I just seen Piranha, like one of those things you stay up late on Friday nights and you watch TBS and you watch all sorts of schlock, like you were saying.
Oh,
and I
yeah.
remember seeing the cover of Piranha 2 in the Blockbuster, and I'm like, they're flying now? Like
The spawning.
So then when I see the remake of Piranha a couple years ago, and then Piranha 3DD, like I get the references that it's making fun of the original, and then of course Richard Dreyfuss leading off the movie with like, I'm like, you're kidding me. This is like totally. I love how when they make fun of themselves. Yeah. So like, yeah, Piranha, the original Piranha. I'm like, oh, I want to see this, and I'm like, it's because it's like, don't go in the water. Like I can go in the fresh water. There's Piranha. Because they're afraid of Jaws in the salt water.
That's it. Just like Jaws 2 or Jaws 4, the one with Michael Caine, where the shark actually comes from New England to the Bahamas for some reason.
Boom. First of all, Johnny B with the Kingdom of Spiders is the movie. That's the title I was looking for. Yes. I actually remember because I looked it up. I was actually mowing the grass when I looked that up the other day because my daughter was asking me about tarantulas. And then there was a case this week where somebody threw a tarantula at a squatter here in St. Paul or something. That's another strange thing, but yeah. So where do we put it? Where do we put a bow on this conversation and finish it in Fargo? Because literally we could probably go on another 2 hours talking about bad 80s movies, 70s and 80s movies. Like I'm trying to think of the one where like the people get sick drinking like it was like some sink overflowed with some crap in it, and it like got everybody sick, and one guy fell off a light tower at a stadium. And then there was the bees. I think it was the swarm where they all came to the Astrodome, and that was the end of the movie because of the radio signals and like
the stuff.
Yeah,
remember the stuff, the one where they find the cavern full of like this goop, but they taste really good, so they start selling it. Right? It's called the stuff. It's like Oreo cream. It's like Oreo cream filling, and then it starts mutating everybody, and they turn them into monsters. It's awful. It's a lot of fun.
That one I haven't seen. I'm writing these down because once I finish Shoresy, I got to finish the last 2 episodes of Shoresy before I move in. And another thing, if with these series, like, all right, last side topic with everybody taking the context of if you've never heard from JD before, you've never heard from me, you hear us just really, what the heck are we actually talking about? What is on your like playlist right now of things you're watching? So we can know what is your current viewing habits? Because we finished Top Chef. And then I went to Shoresy because that's what married men do. They go from Top Chef to something that their wife will not watch with them. What will your wife not watch with you?
I'll be honest with you. My watch list right now is nothing. I am a writer. I podcast. I coach. I teach. I'm in grad school. I don't watch a lot of TV right now. And when I do watch it, that's usually going to be either because I'm motivated, like I have to watch this. Like I was really into X-Men 97 when that was out over the spring because it was probably the best show on TV at that point. Or I'll go on YouTube and I'll watch like Professor of Rock documentaries because that's awesome. And I love listening to him talk about just music. I have to be motivated to watch something. Like I don't have enough time to just binge watch a bunch of stuff. I have some nasty ADD, and if I don't keep myself busy, I go crazy. So at the moment I watch wrestling, and I'll watch, like, if I want to watch something, I'll make sure I carve out time to watch it. So like, I don't have like I'm wasting time watching stuff. Like if I'm dad, I'm super present in being dad. If I'm working on coaching, I'm super present in being coaching. Like it's one of the things that I've been super focused and attuned to right now in my life is to make sure that whatever I'm doing, I'm there and I'm doing it right now. So if I'm working on a book, I'm working on a book. If I'm in grad school, I'm working on grad school. Like I don't have like a watch list right now. Like I tried to watch one episode of The Acolyte and it bored me, so I was just done with it. Like, and it's just, I'm not.
I've watched two. I need to get. I just like
I didn't
don't
like it.
own. I don't actually own. Actually, I do own the Star Wars movies. I didn't prior to Apple TV.
So
It's just though I like the live action. I did go through Rebels, so I struggle with like the animation of that canon. It's just like
I can see it.
Rebels. I thought was good enough of a story, but there's some things like some of the origin stories with the Empire, and I'm just like it's a little too cartoony. I'm like,
I get that.
I prefer give me CGI with real people, not CGI animation, if you know what I mean.
I
Like,
get it.
okay, it's
I
great.
like Clone Wars. I like Rebels. I thought those were really good. I really liked the Ahsoka show they came out with last year. I thought it
Love
was
that.
great.
Love that.
I loved Mandalorian. So that was really good for me.
Well,
This one
people are
just isn't
shitting on the Book of Boba Fett. I still liked it. Shut up.
it's
I
all right.
liked it.
It's all
Okay,
right.
it's
Yeah,
not
it's
their
all
best. I don't care. I don't care. I'm like take the writing and the what you know about the world out of it.
right. Mhm.
Like watching pro wrestling. I suspend my reality. I'm just watching to be entertained. I'm not watching to
Yeah.
critique. So
Yeah, no, and sometimes you got to just turn your brain off and just watch it. That's what I like. I'll find YouTube. Like if I'm really bored, I'll find YouTube documentaries that I'll watch, and it's something I can have on in the background. And like I'm learning something, or I'm playing with my phone, or if it's not that good, like I'll find all kinds of stuff. Like I like learning things that really intrigues me. Like I said, I'll find like documentaries about like comic book stuff that I've missed out on. I'll just listen to it, or like some wrestling stuff, or like I said, Professor of Rock is one I'm really super into right now because that guy just goes deep dives into like these songs and and it's super cool to like learn about things. So I would, if I'm not doing something, I'd like to at least learn about something because maybe I'll be on Jeopardy someday and not to answer a question.
I've never gotten past the first round. Just never have. I had a classmate, Ryan Hall. He was on it a couple years ago. I want to say I can't. I remember the day. I don't remember the actual year. Oddly enough, but yeah, I had a classmate on it, and I know Andy Vogel, who was formerly the coach at Hiram. He's now moved back to Pennsylvania. I know he's made it pretty far in the process. I know
It's so
he's a
cool.
guy that whenever I do trivia contests and stuff for wrestling, him and Tom Carr at Oklahoma Wesleyan are just like, great, thanks for screwing up the curve for everybody else. Like, it's like one of those things. But
I'm
I
good
think
dude.
like I got Shorzy and the Acolyte on mine. Anything else? Like, how can I tie this back to pro wrestling to finish? Oh yeah. Anyway, on Twitter or X, excuse me, the artist formerly known as Twitter, JD_Oliva, Instagram right there on your screen, J.D.Oliva. JD, again, I knew we were going to do this and
It's
it
the
was going to be
best.
like this. Gaijin, Gaijin on Kickstarter. Check it out. And if you're into the other stuff that he's got, why don't you pitch that while we've got a chance to pick up some of
Yeah.
your other stuff and what type of genre those books are in.
So, like I said, I'm a writer. Gaijin is my new book. It's a nitty gritty crime noir thriller that happens to take place in the world of pro wrestling. It's available on Amazon. My other books, the Books of Jericho, it's all like supernatural thriller stuff, werewolves, vampires, that kind of thing, with an international assassin. So it's pretty cool. It's those books are kind of like what if John Wick meets the X Files. And then I've got a series called the Wolfstone Saga that's more like urban fantasy type stuff. Superheroes, wizards, warlock, that kind of thing. So, I mean, if you're into any of those things, you should check out my work. It's pretty cool. I enjoy it. Best place to follow me is on Twitter. I talk about amateur wrestling, pro wrestling, comics, movies, stuff all the time. I've got a podcast called the Mike and JD Show. It's on the Voices of Wrestling Network. We go live every Thursday night at 11:30 Eastern, 10:30 Central Time. We talk about the news of the day of pro wrestling. We got a podcast. We got a Patreon for the Mike and JD Show, and I have my own stuff on the Patreon that I do where I'll talk about what's going on in my life, or we'll review old movies or whatever. So like that's kind of the stuff I'm into, man.
Review old movies.
Follow.
Okay, I might have to call you up to be on that one because
I would love to because this is a new thing. We just started this. I did Batman this past week, and it's one of my favorite movies. We are doing Big Trouble in Little China next week, so that's just going to be something fun to do. So it's a good time, man. I enjoy being a nerd.
When you roll Spaceballs around, let's chat because I think I can watch that one on mute because now again one of those things where the jokes hit a little bit different when you're 12 than when you're 25. So
Yep.
or 45. So all right, JD, appreciate the time, man. I'll see you in a couple weeks in Fargo. It's gonna be about that time again.
See you in the dome, my friend. Thank you.